Good morning, in case you're just joining us, and you're in time for our second conversation on Daybreak this morning. We are talking about matters malaria. The country, we understand, has made quite a number of strides in terms of addressing malaria. And of course, we also have concerns about a new species of, mosquito that has been discovered in the country. Actually, it was last year when it was first reported. And of course, Kemri has also said that it has been discovered in another county. We will be discussing what this is and what this means to the efforts that the country has put in place in eliminating malaria in our country in just a bit. But joining me for this conversation, I have Dr. Willis Ahwale, the advisor and Malaria Council. Thank you, Daktari, for creating time for us.
Thank you.
And also joining us online virtually, Dr. Eric Ochomo, a senior research scientist at Kemri. Thank you, Daktari, for creating time for us this morning. All right, so we'll be engaging Dr. Ochomo in just a bit. But let me just start with you, Dr. Ahwale. We are looking at the status of malaria in the country. A good point to start probably would be just to assess in terms of prevalence, to look at where we are at. And if you compare that with the trends, is it decreasing? Is it increasing? Where are we as a country?
Yeah, thank you for that. And let me start by saying, yes, malaria remains a major cause of illness and death in this country. But I must say that we have had tremendous progress in the past maybe 15 years or so. We've seen the prevalence of malaria actually reduced by almost 50% in a big part of the country. In fact, the last malaria indicator survey of 2010 showed that on average, the prevalence reduced from 8%, meaning that 8 out of 100 people tested positive in 2015, while in 2020, this reduced to 5.6%. But that is on average nationally. But there was also good progress in areas with a high burden of malaria in Western region, what we call the lake endemic, which used to have a prevalence of very close to 30% around 2015, and this has now reduced to about 18–19%, the prevalence.
30 to 19?
Yes. We've also seen a reduction even in the coastal region, now going to below 5% from almost 10%. So in total, we've seen an acceleration, especially the last 10 years, the acceleration of reduction. The rate of reduction has been quite promising. But we are also now seeing what I can say a plateau. The reduction is not as much as then we expected, especially in the last 3–4 years, which we could start attributing partly to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic that had an impact on access to health systems at that time. And there will be other challenges that we can discuss.
In the course of this conversation.
Yes.
Probably, what would you attribute that progress that you were talking about to, especially in the areas like Western and Coast, where you're seeing the prevalence rate has really, decreased over the last few years? What is it that you'd say has worked?
Yeah, what has worked is that the tools that are used to prevent and treat malaria became more easily accessible to communities in these areas. We are talking of what we call long-lasting insecticide-treated bed nets. We are talking the introduction of new treatments in the mid-2000s, around 2007, 2008, when we started using artemisinin-based combination therapy because of the resistance to the previous medicines. We are also talking about efforts of doing indoor residual spraying, so that walls in areas with a high burden were sprayed and the mosquitoes then die. We're also talking of efforts in terms of ensuring that pregnant women access what we call preventive treatment as they attend antenatal clinics, because pregnant women are at a very high risk of malaria, and malaria in pregnancy has severe effects, both on the mother. It can lead to anemia. On the unborn baby, it can lead to what we call low birth weight. And in severe cases, actually, malaria can cause abortions in pregnant women. So that's the importance of ensuring that they get that preventive treatment. And for me, I think the campaign also to just mobilize communities, ensure that they are using these tools, that they have access to it. A lot of this has been supported because resources from global donors like the Global Fund, also the government and the US President's Malaria Initiative, there's been an increase in those resources to ensure that this reach the people.
All right. I want to get back to you just to tell us a bit more about what the strides we have achieved as a country. But I also want to rope in Dr. Eric Ochomo, Senior Research Scientist at KEMRI. Daktari, good morning once again. And, we're having this conversation at a time when we have been exposed to some information that there could be a new species of mosquito within the borders of Kenya. Actually, the very first time this was reported was last year. Tell us a bit more about this discovery and what it means, and what species are we talking about?
Great, and glad to be here. So in Kenya, we have what you call our traditional native species of mosquitoes. In Western Kenya, you will mostly find Anopheles gambiae, Anopheles arabiensis, and Anopheles fenestris as the main species that we see. Now, something about those species is that they mostly transmit malaria in rural settings. And the reason for that is that they breed in temporary habitats. So temporary water bodies. So when it rains, you will see that there's lots of pockets of water. There are things like hoof prints that are created. And this provides a conducive breeding environment for this kind of species of mosquitoes. And this is mostly in the rural settings. We haven't actually documented any transmission of malaria in any of our urban cities. And so this new species we're talking about is known as Anopheles stephensii. It's a species that is native to Southeast Asia and the Arabian Peninsula until recently. Actually, it's only about 10 years ago that was first reported in Africa, in Djibouti. And then a few years later, in 2016, there was a report of the same species having gotten to Ethiopia. And then Sudan, and then Somalia, Nigeria, and now Kenya. Kenya, we first discovered this species in Kenya in Marsabit in December last year. And this was in two sub-counties, in Lysamis and in Saku. And then, actually, concurrently, there was another team that was doing some work in Turkana that also discovered the same species around the same time in Turkana, in Lodwar. And recently, there has been additional discoveries now in Mandera, and we suspect that we may also have the species in Elgeyo Marakwet. Why we worry about this species? It's really not a new vector species, but it's a new vector species in our environment. Is that in the areas where it has been found, it is an urban breeder. So it breeds in temporary water storage containers. So for example, if you have a tank in your compound that traps rainwater, but it's usually not covered, or you have a small hole that is used to drain off excess water, it can very easily get into that tank and breed in there. Number two, it breeds in very dirty water, contaminated water. So things like drainage. So where we have those mitaros that are not being cleaned up, it's very easy to find this vector breeding in such habitats. This mosquito, again, the other thing we worry about is that it's a very good vector of both Plasmodium falciparum and Plasmodium vivax. In Kenya, the bulk of our malaria transmission is actually Plasmodium falciparum. We haven't had a lot of vivax. And this is important because currently our guidelines really support the treatment of Plasmodium falciparum malaria, not really the management of Plasmodium vivax.
All right.
And number two, okay.
All right, I'll come back to you, Daktari, just to also just explain to us more about what this means. A mosquito that can transmit two types of, viruses. But then again, I just want us to take a very short break right here on Daybreak. We want to, come back with this conversation. Do stay with us. We're talking about the fight against malaria, the new discoveries, and the strides we've achieved as a country. You can begin engaging us on social media at Citizen TV Kenya, at Safin_Chieng. The hashtag is Daybreak.